Welcome to Ethos Effect.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast. After building and learning from failures,
We discovered our ethos and leveraged it
to scale, sell, and build again our seven-figure businesses.
whether you're starting out or leveling up.
This podcast is your source for innovation and lasting impact.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast. I'm Donovan Reiches, and this is Chelsea Reiches.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that was perfect.
So I wanted to intro our talk with Michael Gorton, super interesting guy, founded Teladoc, which was the OG in telemedicine. And telemedicine to me is such an interesting field because it's only been around officially, like for all consumers, for like 20 years. And it seems so obvious now, but obviously it wasn't then. Really inspiring guy. What did you think about Michael?
Well, if you couldn't tell, I was a little bit of a fangirl, so heads up to all the listeners. I was pretty mesmerized by Michael Gorton and his wife, Shelley Gorton, who actually attended the podcast as well. Like, talk about two incredible people. I love the fact that we can use this podcast to highlight and give people like him a platform. Obviously, he's a 15-time serial entrepreneur, founder of Teladoc, as you have already mentioned, trillion-dollar industry.
Yeah, and I didn't realize when Teladoc went public, it was a $30 billion market cap. That's how big Teladoc was. That's insane.
The space, there's all other telecommunications, internet. He's had an impact on a multitude of industries, but he's so humble and he's so well-spoken. And, you'll listen in the podcast and you'll hear about these serious challenges, right? Like threats of going to prison, crazy stuff. And he just approaches it with such an interesting ethos, which I think our listeners will get immense value out of. I know I did.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I found was how highly regulated that was because every state has its own medical board and they all had different ideas, many of them in opposition into this even being legal, which is, that's a whole different set of hurdles when you're trying to start a business, is trying to convince the government that it's okay, that it's even legal to do. So without further ado, we'll get into our talk with Michael Gorton. Please give us a like or subscribe if you found the content today interesting. Hopefully we can bring some more stuff to all of the listeners. We are recording a lot here today, so this will all be going out in the future.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect podcast. I am Chelsea Reiches, here with my husband, Donovan Reiches, and our esteemed guest, Mr. Michael Gorton. Michael is a 15-time serial entrepreneur, Teladoc founder, which is now a $500 billion industry. He's an award-winning 4-time best-selling author, keynote speaker, advisor, and something I find really interesting, an adventurer. Thank you for being here, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks for making
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy that you're here. I know that you've got some other speaking engagements, so we really appreciate you making the time while you're in town.
Sure. Happy to do it.
So the Ethos Effect podcast, it's all about trailblazing entrepreneurs who've revolutionized their industry in different ways. And you've obviously done that to a lot of different industries. But I want you to take us back to the very beginning, before Teladoc, before Recuro, your first business, and maybe even a little bit earlier when you were younger. How did you know that this was the life that you wanted?
I didn't know I wanted to be an entrepreneur until I was 8 years into being an engineer.
Okay.
I thought I wanted to be the CEO of a company, and the chief engineer of the company said to me that we don't need great engineers in this company. And I just looked at him and I thought, okay, I'm going to go somewhere where I can be a great engineer, and becoming an entrepreneur was it.
Interesting. What was the first business?
The first business was an international trade company where I built very specialized computers and sold them worldwide.
Is that the one that you sold in 2020?
No.
Okay.
No, a lot longer.
10 businesses later. Got it. With all these different companies that you've had, do you feel like there's a guiding principle? We talk a lot about ethos, obviously, here on our podcast. Yeah. Is there one that's consistent for you?
There is. I think passion is the thing that you need in every single company, but the smart entrepreneurs surround themselves by people smarter than them, and they listen to them. that's what I've done in every company.
I love that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, the Teladoc thing is obviously close to us as well. We're in benefits consulting, so it's a story that we know well. And I can remember, putting Teladoc in groups like 10 years ago. And now it's such an obvious thing, right? It's obvious every group plan has one across the country. It's really, I don't think there are any without
Probably not.
telemedicine.
There shouldn't be.
But back then, I can remember pitching it to employers, and sometimes they'd be like, what? Like it seems obvious now, it wasn't back then. How did that whole thing get started? I mean, it's only, what, a 25-year-old industry?
Right. Yeah. Well, the creation of the idea was in Boston, 1967, 1968.
Okay.
But for me, it happened when I sold a company in the late 90s. I called a bunch of friends and said, I want to climb Kilimanjaro. And one of my buddies, Dr. Brooks, was jealous that he had not made as much money as me. And so he said, let's build a company. I know. And so I said, okay, Byron, we're climbing Kilimanjaro and talking about this new thing that he wanted to call cyber medical services.
That's terrible.
The people who remember Terminator think, no more of this I'll be back stuff.
No kidding. Wasn't he taking, I read your book, he was taking consults on the mountain. And isn't that how some of the ideas spurred?
Right. Well, when he first started talking about it was a lot of technology in a vest. And he's sitting in his tent talking through a satellite link back down to Houston, Texas. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm talking to patients. And I went, you could do that? So that was the beginnings.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. You talked about that kind of competitive friendship with him. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, has that been a theme throughout your life? And has that contributed to your success as an entrepreneur? You kind of mentioned surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you, but that competitive camaraderie, has that been around a while in your life?
Yeah, I love the competitive nature between his friendship and mine and several others. But it was fun to work together to develop something. And, I have to give Byron, that's his first name, credit for putting the essential assets together. The business pieces we all had to tie into one piece, but figuring out how are we going to communicate with the medical board? So you've read the book, so you know.
That's the story.
The first time we went to see a board of medical examiners, I called Dr. Boltinghouse, another one of the doctors involved with us, and I said, I want to go see the board. And he said, no, you don't. And I said, yeah, I do. And he goes, no, they call you when you're in trouble, and it's never good. So we went there. I told them with great passion how we were going to change the world. And they told me with very simple directness, you're going to prison. And so that was the big challenge. How do we convince these people who have their own court system, their own judges, that what we're doing is fundamentally right?
And their own preconceived notions that it's not right is what I kind of took from the legislative battles. It was this constant, like, you're breaking the law, but there was no law. Like, there wasn't, I mean, from what I read in the book, there was nowhere for the 50 states where you could go and see all the legislative rules around telemedicine in one place. So you had to create that.
We did. We had to create everything.
Right.
But well, I mean, it's a story for another time, but there was a great lawyer named Rocky Deer who figured out how to do a 50-state analysis for us on entrepreneurial costs. And just building that was a valuable resource, but it was only a resource. We still got challenged by 17 different boards of medical examiners, all of whom thought we were going to go to their state prisons.
Well,
as permanent guests.
Right, exactly. Because telemedicine was really big in the state prisons. That's kind of how it's, especially in Georgia, right? It started to take off that way. But tell me a little bit more about, so the company's formed, you have this amazing idea. You had a mentor who was like the only person that actually believed in you, where you were like, I should do this. What was his name?
Nathan Morton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I was telling my husband that, like, when you And I think about back to even when we started a business, like everyone's like, that's crazy. Like
Yeah.
you don't know what you're doing, right? But to
Uh-huh.
have that one person that has done it, has, achieved really great things, look at you and be like, you got this. That's really cool. But the challenge is you had no network of doctors, you had no billing system, you had no interface with the carriers to actually like be a part of a health plan. There was a lot of missing pieces, we'll say. So how did you look at this giant problem and just one by one knock these issues out?
Yeah.
Where do you start?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm an engineer. Come
Yeah.
on.
That's
this
true.
is what we do. And we solve problems. Yeah, Nathan. Okay, I'll go back to Nathan Morton for
Sure.
just a second, because I think when I first started thinking about doing this, he was one of the first people I called, because he had been a central figure in the Target department stores, in Home Depot, and then
Oh, that's
later
right.
as the founder and CEO of CompUSA, which is now gone. Uh, uh, he built that from concept to $4 billion. And when I talked to him about it, he said, this idea will be bigger than CompUSA. And I just thought, $4 billion, that's impossible. But we got Teladoc to $30 billion.
Right.
So, and I think the telemedicine industry is just going to grow from here.
For sure. How did you decide which problem was the one? How did you prioritize all your problems? Because there was a lot of them, right? Which one did you pick first and why?
In telemedicine, there were two fundamental problems. One of them was, can you practice medicine across state lines? And the way we used to joke about this, because I'm in Texas, Oklahoma is our next door neighbor, we would say, well, people in Oklahoma are different. But yeah, there we go. But practicing medicine across state lines seems obvious. But the problem is the state boards of medical examiners are in all 50 states, and they're like little fiefdoms. They don't want to give up their power, and we didn't think they ever would. So the bigger problem that we decided to try and resolve was, is it appropriate to treat a patient you've never touched? And when the Texas Board of Medical Examiners said to us, you're going to prison, it was because their position was no doctor should treat a patient they haven't touched. And what we did was, in the book, I use the term lawyers, guns, and money quite a bit. And that's from an old Warren Zevon song, where a kid gets in trouble and he calls his dad and he said, Dad, send lawyers, guns, and money.
Yep.
Right. And what we felt like we should never do with an entity that has their own judges, their own court systems, was go in with lawyers, guns, and money. So we went in with thought leadership, and we said, doctors have been practicing medicine this way since the invention of the telephone. It's called cross coverage. So Dr. Jones doesn't want to work 24 hours a day, so she assigns Dr. Smith to cover for her on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If I'm the patient and she's not available, I get the other doctor. And that was okay with them, but it was a very broken model. The covering doctor did not have my medical record, would not get paid for it, wasn't covered by medical malpractice, and most of the time didn't call back in the after hours event. So we fixed that. And that's the way we brought the boards of medical examiners to the point where they said, okay, let's go ahead and try this.
I found it interesting that you did not name the states in the book. I think that was obviously very intentional, right?
Correct.
Some
Yeah.
states were worse than
Yeah.
others, I take
Yeah.
it.
One state hired an actor to try and trick
yeah.
doctors into writing prescriptions for narcotics.
Uh,
To me, that's embarrassing. And I
Yeah.
didn't want to be the reason to embarrass a state or get them mad at me. So
Right.
we just called them states A, state B, state C.
wow.
Well, it says a lot about your character.
I
Oh, that's awesome.
don't want to go to jail, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, they've already threatened you with it a couple times. Why not keep pushing, right? I love, and I've talked to a lot of people about it since I read your book, the idea of bringing a softer approach to certain problems. And I think as younger entrepreneurs, when there's an obstacle in our way, I want to destroy everything in the path and find a solution.
Yeah.
And I think it's very powerful that you did not take that approach. Have you taken that softer approach in other businesses when you've been faced with challenges? And how
Yeah.
did you know when to do that versus power through? And
I think if there's a person with an opinion on the other side of the table, you shouldn't power through it.
okay.
unless maybe they're a dimwit or something. I don't know. But for the most part, it's easier to get things done when you collaborate, when you find
Absolutely.
middle ground. And we knew we would never win that battle. In fact, if you think about the time between when Jay Sanders thought up the idea to when we started Teladoc, the biggest problem was that everybody had tried to use lawyers, guns, and money, and it failed. And the thing that we did different was we said, thought leadership, let's get on the same side of the table with them. And quite often in the 17 states that served us with proclamations that we were breaking their laws, almost always we would bring a surgeon general or a HHS secretary in, and we'd sit down with them and we'd say, this is what we're doing. How can we make it work for you and for the doctors in your state and for the patients in your state? So everybody improves their position.
I think it's very powerful taking that like education first approach. It sounds like it. I know even in our industry, you're probably very familiar with employee benefits,
Oh, yeah.
right? When you're going self-funded and you're trying to really give employers control over their plans, obviously there's big opposition to that. And, I find we always end up kind of walking this line where it's like, you can't really lawyer guns and money out of your situation. All you can do is educate and hope that people start to understand and come around. So
Yep.
I was really inspired by that. You mentioned something else too about, let me get this right, Occam's razor, that
Yeah.
the simple answer is usually the answer.
Yep. So I'm a scientist, and this is a fundamental principle in science, and that is, if there are two explanations for a problem, pick the simple one, because nature tends to be simple. It tends to be streamlined, and so we use Occam's razor in every company we build.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did actually, let's start with what is digital medical home? And then I want to know how it came to be.
One of the things we did in the early days of Teladoc was built everything. And one of the things that we had to build was our own electronic medical record. So in 2000, 2003 timeframe, electronic medical records worked. Doctors hated them. And we tried building one, and we needed them to use an electronic medical record. And what we ultimately decided was, let's go into the doctor's offices and look to see what's the form on that clipboard that they're writing on. And we went back to our programmers and said, there's 5 different forms. Make our interface look like those 5 forms. Let the doctor pick which one to use. And that now becomes the interface for the electronic medical record. So this is another place where we kind of use Occam's razor, or the simplest path to get the doctors using something that was super complicated.
Right.
And the end result was, by the time I left Teladoc, we had the largest group of medical doctors on medical records at the time. And so now if you start thinking about what is the electronic medical record and how much has it evolved over the years, the electronic medical record is now fairly static. And what's next in healthcare, the next generation of healthcare, is going to be catching things before they get expensive and dangerous. And how do we do that? With data. So if you're wearing a smartwatch, or one of my favorite stories, my wife is sitting over there beyond the view of these cameras. And last year for Christmas, I gave her a scale, right? So
she's probably like, thanks.
Donovan, if you want to figure out a quick way to give your wife a scale
Not a
for
great
Christmas,
present.
right?
No.
So, but the reality is we love data. And these new modern scales, you stand on them in your bare feet for 30 seconds and they give you all kinds of data. So the world is full of data now. And if we can use that properly, we can start seeing trend lines way before things happen, right? But where's all that data going to go? It can't go into the electronic medical record. So what we said was, let's create something new that sits in front of the electronic medical record. Call it the digital medical home. All the data goes there, and then the medical record, or that digital medical home, can connect to any Epic, Cerner, any kind of electronic medical record that's out there, but also have tremendous amounts of data.
I love it. I think the thing that I've noticed with data is like there's access to a lot of data sometimes, depending on how you're designing your benefits program, but just in general in life, there's data, but actionable data seems to be a different, whole different beast. And I love that the digital medical home is about actionable data. Like, how are we going to use this to have a longer, happier life? When I was reading this part of the book, The Digital Medical Home, I just imagined like walking into a futuristic home and there being like a voice that's like, your heart rate is a little bit higher today. Maybe, like go and meditate and take a nice bath or whatever. Like I really do think it's really neat. So that's part of Recuro Health though. That has nothing to do with Teladoc, correct?
Correct. No.
Okay.
Well, I think Teladoc is watching what Recuro does and learning. So in the early days of Teladoc, we had to be innovators. In the later days of Teladoc, Jason and the current team had to be mainstream. And now there's a time for great innovation again. But I think to your point, the way I love telling this story is imagine going and sitting in your doctor's office. The first thing that ever happens is they put a cuff on your arm, pump it up, they say 120/70. That is a static data point. It is a single point. How are you feeling in this very instant? Are you nervous because you're in the doctor's office? Elevated numbers. If you're an athlete and this is a competition, you're like, okay, I'm going to get the lowest pulse rate, the best, so you're
focused,
doing what you said,
Somebody
taking the relax and get a good number. But it becomes reasonable data when it's not a single data point, but a trend line. And if you're only going to see your doctor once or twice a year, the trend line is really long. What if your smartwatch could capture data and the doctor then, when you go see he or her, can go click, click, click. I want to see your pulse rate at 7 a.m. every day in a graph. And now you're going to start seeing trend lines. And then you want to see pulse ox and body temperature and
sleep.
All of these other data points. And what we're going to see over the next 10 years is clinical studies that will show when these two things or these three things or these five things start happening, it's the precursor to cancer. So we'll start catching cancer pre-stage 1 just by the watch you're wearing or the scale that your wife did not throw at you.
Predictive analytics or preemptive care at its finest is what this sounds like.
Exactly.
I'm very excited for it. I made a video a few weeks ago and it was before I read your book and I was like, man, I need to go back and re-record this video. And it was about AI in health insurance and talked a little bit about, I know that, the AI algorithms are looking for those trends in the data to spot claims earlier, right? Which will result in lower premiums for everybody. But what I didn't realize was this next step that like, it's actually already being done, like it was very much a conversation of the future, but we're there and we've been there. So You're obviously on the leading edge of it.
I think, so if you can actually tie Teladoc into Recuro pretty easily by saying, okay, what did we accomplish at Teladoc? The accomplishment was getting a doctor to a patient quickly. Think pre-Teladoc, I want to talk to a doctor. It's get on the phone with the admin. The admin says, next Thursday at 2:00, Thursday at noon, you take a half-day vacation. You go sit with the sick people in the doctor's office. Now it's an app on your phone, and if a doctor doesn't call you on your app in 15 minutes, you're thinking, okay, this thing
Something's
sucks.
wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So before it was 10 days to 3 weeks, and now it's minutes, and that is access. Next generation is Ben Franklin. So remember, Mom told us, Ben Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the next generation is, if you catch things early, it's the ounce of prevention, as opposed to waiting until it's stage 4 cancer and you have years of chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, definitely going to change your body forever. Maybe you're going to die. And but if you catch it at stage 1, it's simple. Your immune system is probably strong enough. All you have to do is tweak a few things and your immune system wins.
There's a lot of really interesting diagnostic tools that are starting to be implemented into health plans that are all these predictive types of tests. Like there's a blood test. Actually, we did it, and I'm sure this isn't revolutionary, but it's just cool that it's trickling downstream, right? We did a blood test that scans for all types of cancers at stage 0. And it's the Grail cancer test. It was incredible. And you just think about, these ideas that you have and bringing them downstream. How long do you think it'll take for digital medical home to kind of get to your average person?
You mentioned Grail. So think about this. Grail was a startup company just a few years ago, and now they're in the mainstream, and real doctors are starting to use the Grail test to catch things early. And, I'm the futurist, so I'm always probably predicting sooner than it's really going to happen. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start seeing the system catching those things early on rather than you waiting till you have symptoms, because symptoms are usually it's too late.
It's sick care at that point.
And we have a personal friend who just finished a book called 100 is the New 30. And this is a guy who's 70 years old, who wakes up in the morning, runs 8 miles at a 7-minute pace, and then jumps on his bicycle, goes mountain biking, and then practices as a physician. And, I wish I could run 7-minute miles.
Same. Even in college, I couldn't run a 7-minute mile. I think I did it once, and it was like the best day of my life. I know I've been asking all the questions. I'm sure you got some.
No. I was just thinking, going back to more of a business aspect, right? You've founded, obviously, Teladoc, which is currently, at a $3 billion market cap, 15 other companies. What inspires you to kind of move on to the next challenge? And when do you get to that point personally? And is it boredom? You get a little antsy to kind of create something new, or what is it? Because for, anybody else, Teladoc would be the achievement of a lifetime.
Maybe retirement after that.
You're moving on to the next thing and starting with another company. What motivates you to do that?
I think knowing your starting point and ending point is part of it. And so you get a company started, you get it to a certain level, and then you say it's time to bring in another team to run it. But it's like a drug, that you get addicted to. And you start thinking about, I've left this deal, now what's next? What can I find that I can do to get this drug again?
The drug is the problems, the problem solving, and the creation of it.
It's figuring out what the problem is and what's the solution. It's kind of like the old Huey Lewis and the News song, I Want a New Drug. It's a love song, right? The guy is going, I want something that makes me feel like I feel when I'm with you. And what's the entrepreneur's version of that drug? I want a drug that makes me feel like I feel when I build something that changes everything.
So what's the next thing for you? What are you working on now?
Right now I'm having fun. So, I'm here in Florida to give a keynote speech tomorrow morning. Written 2 books this summer. And so it's not slowing down. It's just sort of taking a break, having just pure fun, no bosses, no boards, no anything but what we want to do on a day-to-day basis.
That was going to be my next question. If you're still on advisory boards with any of these companies, or
I'm working with 5 different companies right now: a device company, a space company, some behavioral health companies. So that's kind of fun. Somewhere between launching rockets that will go into orbit to making sure people stay healthy.
Last question for you, Michael. If you were to look at the cycles of being an entrepreneur, the cycles of a business, what stands out to you as like key milestones that a business or an entrepreneur hits throughout their life or throughout the life cycle of a business?
Yeah. I think in the beginning is the idea, and a lot of people have ideas. I can't tell you how many times I've been giving talks about Teladoc, for example, and people would come up and say, oh, I had the idea of Teladoc back in the 90s. And so the first part is the idea. The next part is making the commitment. And then once you make the commitment, the really hard part of getting through the slog of day after day, how do I solve today's problems? Because we think it's going to be a lot of fun. And in retrospect, we look back at it, but anybody who's climbed mountains knows that there's times on that mountain where you're maybe on scree and you're stepping forward and sliding back a half a step, and the frustration and the angst and all the things that you feel to try and get to that summit. A year later, 2 years later, you look at the pictures of Kilimanjaro and you go, yeah, there I was on the summit. What a glorious thing.
Right.
and all that. Just take 20 steps and then rest. That's the part that you forget.
Totally. And I think you said in your book, like, great ideas or something, I actually wrote it down. Changing the world is not about great ideas. It's about implementation, working hard and getting kicked in the teeth.
Yeah.
Couldn't understand that one more, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Exactly right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure. I know you have a lot going on, so we're very grateful, and we can't wait to see what you do next to revolutionize and trailblaze more industries.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Before we finish, Michael, where can our audience find you, some of your books, your next projects?
2 places to find me. One is LinkedIn. I think that's the sort of current business social media that everybody should be on. And then I have a personal website, michaelgorton.us. So I think, okay, I want to be a patriot, so there's the .us part rather than .com. But and then the books are all available on Amazon.
Okay, and some new ones on the way.
Maybe.
Yeah. I wrote a science fiction this summer, and there's a sequel, and I'm trying to push it back, but it keeps coming to the forefront.
That's awesome. Thank you.